Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on executive compensation in nonprofits. My name is Sarah Pinder. I'm the Resource Services Manager at Michigan Nonprofit Association, and we're so happy to have you join us for this webinar today. As you can see from the PowerPoint showing on your screen right now, M&A has lots of upcoming events. So take a look at the one showing now, or visit our website, or check out the My Nonprofit News that comes out every other Friday to stay up to date on our events. A few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar today, and so we will be sending out the recording of the webinar as well as the PowerPoint slides to you after the presentation is finished. So feel free to, you don't have to furiously write notes if you want to see the slides, etc. Also, make sure to utilize the questions box or the raise hand function or the chat box if you'd like to ask questions during the webinar. We will likely save the questions till the end and then ask our presenters to field those questions. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of our presenters today, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to give them control of the screen so that we can begin the webinar. At M&A, of course, we know how important executive compensation is to nonprofits. It's arguably one of the largest expenditures for an organization and can be very influential when we're trying to hire and keep the best talent within our nonprofit organizations, which of course we know having the right leader in an organization is crucial to the success of that nonprofit. For those reasons, M&A has invited Jim Donahue today of Donahue and Associates to present this webinar on executive compensation. So I welcome Jim today and look forward to presenting you with great information. Jim, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it very much. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic to your members. And what we're going to go through is really the nuts and bolts of how to put together an executive compensation package. 150 organizations. About 30 recently created a software program that does performance and compensation management. We took our 30 years of experience and saw many performance systems out there. We didn't like many of them, or most of them, and so we decided to create our own. So we just launched that. We're quite excited about that. And now we are partners with Michigan Nonprofit Association to market our services to their membership. Get it right. What do you need to know about nonprofit compensation? And this is coming more of a compensation lawyers, so it's not coming from a legal perspective. So we're looking at how really the nuts and bolts of how to put together an executive comp program. And again, it's the nuts and bolts of how to set executive compensation. Knowing that executive comp is getting a lot of attention. You know, there's a lot of heightened interest in executive compensation. You know, in addition to the IRS, who looks at comp as well as investigating claims of unreasonable compensation, you have a lot of others that are looking at executive comp. Nonprofits are really in a fishbowl. There's a lot of attention placed on nonprofits, and with the ability for anyone to access GuideStar, they can go into your 990 and pull out all the data about your organization, about your revenue, your expenditures, as well as what are you paying your executives, your top executives. How you're paying them, what kind of incentive or bonus plans you're giving them to them, what's the deferred comp, what's their total comp, and that tends to get some attention, especially in the media. And we see a lot more emphasis in the media You're probably aware that Detroit Cranes, on an annual basis, really gives a scorecard of all the compensation of the top nonprofits in the area. And some of that list is kind of gets some eyebrows up of some of the people locally when they see who's on that list. The regulators do get involved with it, state attorneys. We do see some issues coming out of Congress. They just recently passed a regulation on nonprofits as well as for-profits on determining a mathematical ratio of executive pay to the median of the non-executives. And for the for-profit public companies, that's a ratio that needs to be now included into their proxy statements and documents. So it's really the first step on Congress looking on addressing CEO compensation. Donors certainly have an access or the ability to see your 990s. I have done it myself personally when I've looked at some of the charities that I support, and when I saw some that I didn't feel comfortable on what they were spending on, I used that in my consideration. In addition, your employees certainly have access to that data. And we know situations where 990's been distributed throughout the whole organization to all the employees. And so everyone gets an eyeful of what the chief executives are being paid. So there's a lot of interest in compensation, and unfortunately the nonprofits certainly are living a fishbowl. So what we're going to talk about first is not inadequate compensation. It's not necessarily unreasonable, but it's people who are not paid adequately, and there's certainly some ramifications of underpaying your comp, and knowing that the position of the chief executive is certainly the most important job of the whole organization, and so it's really critical to get this right. So if you don't hire or don't compensate the person correctly, then you're going to have a difficulty or inability of hiring the qualified candidate. Again, the CEO, the top position, is certainly a critical position, so it's really important to get the right person in there. And if you don't compensate them correctly, then you're going to have a tough time in retaining that person. And you bring somebody in, they do a great job, and then they go off to greener pastures because you're not recognizing their value or their worth. So there's a lot of concern there that you need to get it right, both at the one end as well as the end of the lower end. And then the CEO salary actually affects the salaries of other executives. If you bring the CEO in at a too low of a rate, then if you go out looking for a CFO, then there's usually some relationships between the top position and their senior staff. So it has a cascading effect if you don't get it right. So, and the other area that a lot of attention is brought to is is excessive compensation. And again, that's an area that is being looked at, and is it reasonable or not? And the definition of reasonable, at least by the IRS terms, is that it's the value of that would ordinarily be paid for like services by a like enterprise under like circumstances. Typical IRS, they tend to be somewhat on the vague side when they put that out. So we have to interpret to what does that really mean. So if the salary package is deemed by their standards to be excess of reasonable, then IRS may impose some intermediate sanctions on both the individual receiving the salary and the organizational managers or the board or directors who approve it. So there's some penalties and risks about not getting it right and not being able to document and justify and support the correct compensation package. So excessive comp is what are really the intermediate sanctions? Well, it really refers to some excise tax that are imposed by the Internal Revenue Service when individuals with a tax-exempt or non-profits receive benefits in excess. And it's an area that can be subject to intermediate sanctions, which is really penalties. And what are the penalties? Well, a disqualified person or somebody in excess is subject to a tax of 25% of the excess amount. And if they elect not to return that amount, then they are actually imposed another 200% penalty is imposed upon them. And then the organization is also responsible for being held for penalties. So again, it's important to get it right. And so what we're going to do is go through the recommended process. And we've been doing this for 30 years, and and I'm sure there's a lot of attention out there by the IRS, but in our experience, we have yet to have one of our clients to have their compensation challenged or reviewed by the IRS. Again, we go through a process, and we hope that we have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, but we have not seen any major attention. Now, we do know of other industries, other nonprofits that have been given attention by the IRS, and some of them have been lost their IRS or their nonprofit status out there. But we could, from talking from our experience, it's out there, but we have not, experienced that there is a lot out there. There's more attention based upon the media. And I'm sure if you remember what has happened not too long ago with the DIA and the media attention that what was being paid to the chief executive over there, and that has gotten a lot of attention, as well as some concern about they could possibly lose their funding when it comes back on the millage. So what we're going to do is go through the process. And we have a recommended 6-step process that we would consider to set the compensation in place. The important part of this is that if you follow a process like this, it shifts the burden of proof to the IRS to prove that the compensation is unreasonable. If you don't follow a process and if you are being challenged by the IRS, then the burden of proof is then put up on you. So this is really critical to have a process in place, document that process, and follow it. Otherwise, again, if it was ever been challenged, it's going to go back to you for the burden of proof when it comes to, are we paying our executive, is it fair and reasonable? Okay, so the first area that we say is to utilize an independent board of directors, those who are involved with the compensation process. What we want is no conflict of interest. And we see a lot of strange things, strange people serving on boards. We see one that receives benefits that provides services as board members. That it should not be done. Again, we see family employee of the organization because they can't be independent. Members that serve another board, I'll prove your pay and conflict of interest policy, product training. A lot of the board members and how decisions are made to get it right. And so you just can't expect them or assume that they know how to do it. And you need to help them and train them in this process. The second step is to document the job requirements and performance of the position. And again, to determine the right organizations, the right talent to the right, as well as the qualifications of they are looking for a document or hire a level for that person. The next part, your whole process, and appropriate to other of the senior functions rules. Okay. So in the marketplace, I mean, who do you can compare yourself to? It's more common to see an incentive plan versus bonus. Bonus sometimes has a negative effect out in the marketplace, and you have a mission. You have certain values. So people, Constellation philosophy statement. Again, it documents what you're doing, why you're paying, and what amounts and where you're going to compare your people to. So we also want to look at how performance will be linked to compensation. And naturally, if a person is going to perform well, we want to reward that person. And we may have some sort of incentive plan or bonus that represents that. And compensation will be then directly linked to achieving goals. So we're paying them competitively, that we're rewarding them based upon their achievements. And then if you do elect to use an incentive system, and again, we see more frequently this happens, it should be then put into the compensation philosophy statement. And frequently we would say that the director has a performance incentive up to a certain percent. And it's recommended to have a cap on that. And then the actual performance will be calculated based upon a performance plan. And the performance plans needs to be a very objective, measurable, quantitative plan that allows the organization to determine, are we achieving our goals, if we, how, to what extent. And so if we do have a bonus or incentive plan in place, the plan should have specific quantitative performance measures. One of the problem areas organizations have is that the directors get around and say, well, we want to give the CEO a $50,000 bonus without having any documentation or rhyme or reason why they're doing it. What is it based upon? And that's a red flag out there if somebody is reviewing or scrutinizing your plans. So we recommend to have minimum standards or conditions for employee or incentive payouts. We want to define if they are doing the right job or meeting the expectations. What does that look like? Is there any things that have to take place that says before we can pay out any incentive or bonus, what's the minimum conditions that the organization needs to achieve? What's the minimum standards? If they are doing a extraordinary job, what's the definition of that? How do we determine that? What's the definition of exceeding standards? So what you're doing is when you are looking and reviewing the performance, then you're inspecting what you expect. So it's very objective. It's very cut and dry. It's cut and dry to the board. It's cut and dry to the executive and the organization and what they need to do to achieve their performance plan. And it makes your board, gives them an easy time to make that decision at the end of the year. Are we going to give the CEO or the executive an incentive? If it is, how much and why are we doing it? So it's really a critical part of, if you do incorporate an incentive or at-risk component into the comp plan, is to have it very documented and have it quantified when it comes to standards. And then each of the performance goals, you may have half a dozen into the system. They're not normally all going to be equal. So what you're going to do is to weight them. You're going to give them, value. And so you're going to have the ability to give weights, and the weights are going to go from anywhere from 5% to 20%, but they're going to add up to 100%. And it's part of a way to summarize the results, meaning that, okay, if I meet all these goals and I exceed some or I met some others, what does that mean? How does that translate to a dollar amount? And so what we normally do is then to take that and convert that to a calculation based upon a weighted rating scoring features. Again, it makes your life, the board's life, a lot easier when they sit down and to determine how much should they incentivize their chief executives. And if you have that in place, it certainly it sets the foundation of it. And we've had situations where during the downturn of the economy, we've gone into the boardrooms and the board members come in, walking in one by one, and they're all come from major local automotive and companies in the area, and they say, "Wow, geez, we're having a terrible time. We're laying people off. We have salary freezes. We've been cutting our salaries. We've cut our contributions to the 401k, and we got to hold the market here to Steve on his comp." And then we start looking at Steve's comp and his performance, and the guy was hitting it out of the ballpark. He was performing in the top of the industry. And I said to the board, I said, "Well, wait a minute, guys. If he was doing this half as good at your companies, you'd be happy campers." And they all looked at me and said, yeah, you're right. And so as a result of it, Steve got a nice pay increase, and he got his full bonus because he hit all the targets and he exceeded them. So it's really easy to make it the board's decision to come up to the conclusion that are we do we have the right measures in place, and are we achieving those? Okay. And there should be a payout cap. And so meaning otherwise you don't have a payout cap, then it looks like a profit sharing plan. So there's usually some sort of up to a certain amount, 10% of this pay, 20% of the pay, whatever that is reasonable, and the board decides to incentivize that executive. Okay, the fourth step is to identify appropriate market comparables. So when you're looking at the market to say, okay, we're looking at reasonable and fair compensation, well, what determines that? So what data are we going to use? Are we going to look at national data? Are we going to look at regional data? Usually is where is the executive recruited from? If we're going to do a national search, the national data makes some sense. If it's something that you're looking at somebody in the region, then possibly just the regional data, or the Midwest is inappropriate. What's the scope of the job? What's the nature or the complexity of the organization? Again, how complex is it? Is it highly complex where we need a highly skilled person? Or is it something that it is not as complex? Where does we compete for talent? And in this case, we can look at for-profits. A lot of organizations we work for, they're nonprofits, but they recruit from the profit area. A lot of the credit unions we work with, they bring their talent in from the commercial banks. So we have to compare the market data to commercial banks. Now, we don't use 100% commercial banks, but we use a number of them. And because that represents the market. And one of the indicators is budget size. If you have an organization, again, of $10 million, then you normally look at organizations with a $10 million budget size or something in that category. If you have a $50 million organization, then you have looking at organizations that are in that $50 million. So the size does matter when it comes to budgets. Now, we have another situation with another credit union. They had a pretty large credit union, and their budget size or their asset size was relatively low for the size of their organization. And then we started to look at the number of members. And when we included member size, then it really boosts their size of their organization as it compared to other larger organizations. And so what we determined is that they had a lot of members, but the members were such of a nature that they didn't have big high paying jobs, and they lived mostly on paycheck to paycheck, and in some cases they did not have the ability to save. So they didn't put a lot of money into the credit union, but they did an awful lot of transactions where their paycheck was being deposited, they were paying their bills, they had other issues and services they were using. So all the complexity of a large credit union and asset size were presented in this credit union because they had the same number of members. So you have to look at various types of things when you start making comparisons. So we usually use multiple sources when it comes to market data. And so there's a lot of reputable published surveys. We would not necessarily pull a survey or market data from a magazine. They tend to not get it right at times. A lot of times your recruiting organizations will provide market data and compensation of certain jobs, and we find some of those may not be a correct representation of the market. A lot of your trade and industry groups will have surveys that tend to be of very good quality. When we do work in the foundation area, the foundation organizations have a lot of very good market data. And in some cases, if you're competing for talent in the for-profit field, then you can actually look at some of the public proxy data. And the best source that we use is we just go to GuideStar and pull the 990 data on all the areas that we see are comparables. And it is acceptable to use for-profit data. And again, if you're competing for talent or services in the for-profit area, then you're competing, then you need to understand that market as well. Okay, so we're looking at market sources. What we normally do is establish a peer group. And a peer group is really organizations that you see that you compete for services or talent. And so what we do is that we look at both nonprofit and profit, and we have profit data that's represented out there in proxy statement as well as surveys. But we look at organizations with similar services and, again, similar size, budget, or revenue. And this is what we would call our peer group. And here's an example of a peer group that we use for one of our social services organizations. You know, as you can see, it's a Detroit area organization, and all the ones that we have listed here, they do very similar services. And in addition, we look at them. The 990s will report, you know, the name of that executive, what the executive is being paid is base pay, is variable pay, any bonus or incentive, any deferred pay, any other compensation that is provided to them, and then it sums up their total compensation. This type of data goes a long way with your board, as well as with anyone that's reviewing your compensation practices. You're actually listing organizations that everyone is familiar with, they can relate to, and they can actually relate and familiar with some of the names that are presented. So we do that a lot. We feel that this is a good source, a good documentation when it comes for establishing your market and your peer group. Here's an example of another organization that we work with. They have basically, we say we're going to use data for profit for 300 for-profit organizations because this organization competes for services in the profit area. We also looked at not-for-profit profit surveys, a number of different types of organizations, and then we look at a peer group of 50 similar nonprofits in the local area. So we do a lot of research with this organization, but it's one that it has a lot of visibility, and so we feel that they're at risk situation that we need to be very careful on establishing compensation. Another organization we work with is a zoo, and so what we have established in their compensation philosophy strategy is we listed surveys that of all zoos and aquariums. We wanted to look at the Edison Institute or the Henry Ford as a good comparison. There is a nonprofit consulting group out of Washington, D.C. called the PRM group that strictly collects information on nonprofits. So we use that. They had some relationship to museums, so we incorporated a survey on the museums. We used the American Society of Employers data, and then we pulled data from the 1990s of comparable zoos across the country. And then this is an organization that if they were to recruit a new CEO, they would do a national search for the best person out there. So we had to look at the geographic of basically all North America. The fifth step that we recommend is to utilize an independent advisor to the review process. Again, we're looking for objectivity, and so it's usually we recommend to bring somebody in that it was independent, who can present you with market data, who cannot have any bias, and no conflicts of interest with the organization. The boards may be uncomfortable making these pay decisions, so a advisor comes in and basically assists them. And then the last thing that we use is the document, and I can't stress how much you need to document. So everything that you do needs to be documented. You need to document the process. You need to document the market. You need to document the strategy, where in the market we're going to pay our executive, how much and why. And then your advisor usually includes as a documentation an opinion letter of competitive and reasonable compensation. And this is what we do on a regular basis. And this, again, makes the board feel comfortable that they're not getting themselves into trouble, that they have a fiduciary responsibilities, and they're relying on an advisor to bring in reliable information and presenting a reliable, proven, recommended steps to establish compensation. Okay. So all compensation actions need to be documented. It needs to be documented in the board minute meetings. It needs to be documented in the 990 form. We have found that documentation and the compensation philosophy has gone a long way in when future boards come into it. New board members come into it, they want to do their own thing. We bring them back to, says, no, this is the way it's been established. This is the market that that the board has approved to determine it. So it helps in situations when board changes. And again, board changes on a regular basis. You get new chairs, and it's a document that helps them say, here's the process. This is how we do it. Okay. This is a page from the 990. This is Schedule J. And Schedule J talks about compensation. And question 3 of Schedule J, it asks 6 questions. And when it comes to how compensation decisions are being made. And so it helps if you could check more of these boxes off. So as many of these boxes off you can check, it's going to help when it comes to supporting and documenting how compensation actions are being made. And when anyone reviews your 990, they'll see what of these items are being checked. Do you have a compensation committee? What sources do you use? Surveys or a study? Is there a written employment contract? Do you use other 990 forms for other organizations? Do you have an independent compensation consultant working with you? And is the compensation approved by the board? In a lot of cases, they recommend the whole board to approve the compensation of the CEO. Not necessarily of all the executives, but basically the CEO. The CEO at that point has the responsibility of setting the comp for the rest of the staff. We've seen at times that the CEO, as a courtesy to the board, tells them what he's doing with his staff, just so he says, just allow them to know that he's being as fair to them as the board being fair to himself. Okay, so there's some areas that we would state are of caution, or some of the pitfalls. And one of the areas that you need to be, cautious on is signing bonuses. And where if you bring in an executive and you're going to bring them in a signing bonus, that sometimes tends to raise a red flag. Why are you doing that? It is acceptable where we see situations where that executive is going to leave his current organization and he's losing maybe his bonus or incentive. And so as a way of saying, okay, we're going to hire you, we know you're going to lose your bonus or incentive, so we're going to make it up to you in the signing bonus. Supplemental deferred compensation. We see a lot of big numbers sometimes in the 990 that refers to supplemental deferred comp. Some of it raises eyebrows, some of it can be supported and justified. Frequently, you have an executive been with the organization for many years. He grew up when the organization was very small. It became large, and over the time, he took minimum pay. There was no ability for the organization to fund a pension program, and all of a sudden they say, well, I'm going to retire in the next 10 years, and I don't have a pension. So the board decides to fund a supplemental pension for them. And so some big numbers put into that to do that. And if it's not documented or supported or explained, it could leave some question out there. Incentive plans, again, a lot of organizations, especially nonprofits, are having more incentive plans. But if they're impossible to measure or not quantifiable or vague, you're going to get, they're going to get yourself into trouble. You're going to have ability to raise questions. Why are you giving this bonus? What's the reason? What is it supported on? We've seen CEOs get in and design their own incentive plan. And the board should be doing this, not the CEO. You'll have some input on it, but they should not be designing it. The goals and objectives of the incentive plan should be set by the board, and it should be reviewed, and they should be stretch goals. They should be goals that it's just not the day-to-day business. It's achieving, our goals, our mission, and how we're going to do it. Are we growing? Are we adding clients to our services? Those are goals that are measurable. Severance plans. You need to be cautious on severance plans. On what happens for severance to be paid out. What's the conditions, and how large are them? And we've seen some extremely large severance plans that would certainly provide scrutiny. Supplemental retirement plans. Again, the same as supplemental deferred comp. The same reason is if you have them, okay, but they need to be supported and justified and explain why you're having them and what's the purpose of it. We've seen this at times. where the CEO comes in and they give him a loan. And this happened just recently with the CEO of the DIA. He was given a $150,000 loan when he was hired, and the purpose of it was to buy a home. And now he's asking for the forgiveness of that loan when he walked out the door. And again, that's getting a lot of scrutiny in the newspapers. It's been publicized in both the Detroit News and the Free Press. And they're going to have a difficult time when it comes to the renewal of their millage because of these things. And so they certainly need to be cautious, as well as any conflict of interest. You know, we've gone through the conflict of interest, and you need to make sure that you don't have conflict of interest when it comes to your board members and the people who are making decisions on compensation. And paying over the 75th percentile of the market. Again, you establish where in the market you want to pay. Up to 75% is reasonable for the right person, the right skills, the right talent. But once you start going over that 75th percentile, now you're getting into the gray area. And then if you go up to the 90th percentile, that really is a red flag out there. And we would not recommend going to the 90th percentile, and we would caution you if it went over the 75th percentile. And then when you're looking at market data, you're using the majority of your market data as for-profits, as comparables. And it's nothing wrong with using for-profits, but not a majority of them. You have to have a reasonable mix in there. And another organization is a large hospice, and they get their talent from the hospitals. Most of their talent comes from the for-profit or large hospitals. So we have to incorporate the for-profit hospital data into it on determining the executive pay. But we document that it's reasonable, it makes sense, because that's where the talent comes from. And the last one is not documenting your compensation actions. As long as you support it, it's in the record. If it's scrutinized, what we've seen is that even if it's a little on the high side, it's been supported. The IRS has accepted it. Okay, we are getting to the end of our session here. Other considerations. When you're looking at determining justification for compensation, is that, you know, what's your condition of the organization? Are you making money, or are you losing money? Can you afford to pay a certain amount? You know, and there's a lot of organizations. Yeah, we want to pay this, but we just don't have our funds there. So that's a consideration you look at. Is the organization outperforming their peers? The examples I used in that one credit union, they were way outperforming their peers. They were the third in the country in the peer group when it comes for performance numbers. So it made sense to reward the CEO accordingly to that. Does the organization compete for nonprofits, for services, or talent when it comes for that? And if it does, then that's a justification to bring in that data into it. Is the organization highly complex? Do you have a very sophisticated software program that you're using to keep track of funds? You know, are you developing yourself? Are you a leader out there? Okay, that's basically our overview today. We went through a lot of things. The area of setting performance goals and incentives is a whole another webinar, because it's involved and complex, and again, it's important to get it right.
Thank you so much, Jim. I certainly learned some new things. I'm hoping those of people on the webinar did as well. We're happy to take questions. Again, please use the question or the chat box or the raise hand function if you have questions for Jim. He's certainly an expert in this field. while we're waiting to see if we have any questions pop up, I do want to remind you that, as Jim mentioned, one of the functions that his organization has recently taken on is to help organizations evaluate employees, and they'll be doing this utilizing a new software that's available to nonprofits called Constellation HR. We are going to have a demonstration of that product on October 21st via webinar, so check that out if you're interested. I know more and more nonprofits are, as Jim mentioned and several times in the presentation today, are responsible for documentation and showing back up to the decisions that we make. Of course, being transparent to the public is important. So if you're in a nonprofit and you're looking for a better way or an easier way or more accurate way to compensate your employees and tracking and gathering information to make those compensation decisions, Constellation HR will be a really interesting product for you to look at and learn more about. So mark the October 21st date on your calendar. And also we'll be having a session in November, which is about goal setting for executives and organizations. So again, another key element to effectively and correctly compensating people is to set those goals from the beginning and put out there what employees should be striving for and what they'll ultimately be measured against.
I have included my email address. Anyone could feel free to, if they have a question later on, is to email me the questions, and we will respond to you with answers to them.
Great, that's a wonderful offer. I do want to mention too, one other resource that Michigan Nonprofit Association offers in this realm is our compensation and benefits report. It was released last fall, but it's still very relevant. What it is, it's a survey that we did of nonprofits throughout the state. We had about 375 people respond to the survey, and they gave us information on what they pay various positions in their organization, what kind of benefits, everything down to vacation time, et cetera, et cetera. And then we were able to work with a partner that put that all together in a nice, concise report, and it's available for purchase on our website. M&A members do receive a discount, and it's a great tool to have, as Jim mentioned, when you get into, how do you figure out what a CEO or someone else upper level position in your organization should be paid, and what resources do you look at. This could be one of your resources to prove the, or have concrete evidence behind your decisions. So check that out, the 2014 Michigan Nonprofit Compensation and Benefits Report. It's a really great tool to have as a nonprofit leader.
It is a very good tool, and it comes in frequently that that's one of our sources.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I haven't had any other questions. I think you did a very good, thorough job today. A couple of participants saying they enjoyed the webinar, so thank you so much. And to all the participants out there, thank you. And again, keep in mind our other upcoming events, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.